Hello and welcome to episode 6 of the Green Henry Show. My name is Keith Green, along with your co-host, Brent Henry. We are coming to you in this episode, bringing you in association with End Party Politics, LLC. We'll be providing you with an in-depth look at a very promising independent candidate running for American public office. End Party Politics believes in the biggest thing standing in our way of freedom today is knowledge and access to our systems of government and voting processes. They believe the best way to change the system is from the ground up and at our state and local levels. They are working to connect people with the government representatives they are electing. They believe this will help end a lot of issues, most importantly, the separation between our people and their government. It's all about we the people. Let us always continue to improve our representative constitutional rights. If you want to become a more all-around educated American voter, please make sure to like, rate, and follow End Party Politics on Facebook, just like The Green Henry Show. There is a lot of great discussions and information being shared on their page. We will provide a link in the video description. Please go visit their page. Today we are speaking with Richard Dedor, who is an independent candidate running for Iowa State House of Representatives for District 19. Mr. Dedor's key focuses are invest in education to ensure we provide the best opportunities for all our students, ensure our tax policies support families, small businesses to ensure quality jobs and opportunities for Iowans, promote sustainable economic development focused on middle class, the jobs of the future, support a clean environment so all Iowans can enjoy our parks, fields, and streams for generations to come, reform our criminal justice system to ensure we support and protect all Iowans for our communities. Richard stands for principled leadership, fiscal responsibility, equal opportunity, personal freedom, and a philosophy that lifts everyone up and leaves no one behind. His background includes being awarded the American Citizenship Medal from the Iowan Bar Association in 2002 and ran for mayor of Mason City, Iowa. Later that year, his efforts have helped build homes with Habitat for Humanity, reduce substance abuse in teenagers, introduce youth and adults to tennis through the United States Tennis Association, raised awareness of the need for research and fundraising with the Alzheimer's Association, where he serves on the board of directors, and supports the efforts of the U.S. Civil Rights Commission through his service on the Iowa Advisory Council. He was born in Denver, Colorado, and raised in Mason City. Richard attended Mason City High School and is a graduate of both North Iowa Area Community College and the University of Northern Iowa. So a straight-up Iowan here. It is that call to serve that inspired him to join the race for the Iowa House. Richard lives in the Urbandale with his husband Steve and their dog Aiden. And the Dedor campaign is always looking for volunteers and donors. For more information on Richard Dedor, please visit richarddedor.com. That is RICHARDDEDOR.com, and follow him on Twitter at twitter.com/RichardDedor. He is also on Facebook. Make sure to check him out there. And without further ado, let us get into the show.
Well, thank you so much for being here with us. How has the campaign been going so far?
The campaign has been going really well. It's really interesting to see kind of the response that you get from people who don't typically see an independent running in the local level. And so when they hear that I'm an independent, the interest level kind of goes up because there's not this, oh, you're Republican, I'm never going to talk to you. You're a Democrat, I'm never going to talk to you. So so far, we're getting at least neutral responses, if not positive responses. So obviously, once we start door knocking and kind of take the campaign to that phase, it'll be a little bit different. But so far, it's been very positive.
What have been the concerns of the people in your district?
So that's a really, really, really big and wide question, obviously. In our district, it's interesting because we are connected to Des Moines, which is obviously the state capital. And so you have suburban challenges, but we also have a lot of rural communities. You have rural challenges as well. and not many districts in the state have that challenge, but also opportunity. And so whoever will represent our district.
Your district is around like 30,000 people, somewhere in there. Is that fair to say? You have, Urbandale, Dallas Center, DeSoto, Dexter, Polk City, Redfield. Can you give us kind of a picture of the atmosphere, the businesses, what's around in those communities?
Sure. So one of the biggest things that has happened really in the last year, it will not be in our district, but it was one of the big things that will happen in a neighboring community. Apple decided they were going to come and build a big data center and put a bunch of money into the community. And so while that's not in the district, it's still something that is important to the area. But in terms of how just like the local economy is working and how schools are functioning, a lot of the school districts just did we just passed a penny sales tax increase, a local option sales tax to fund property tax revenue, a lot of city improvements. And that was a really big initiative in all of these communities. And it passed, if I remember correctly, it was like 70-30, passing a tax increase, which is never an easy thing to do. But the voters said we wanted to do it. We wanted to make those investments in our communities. There's been a big push in all of our local communities here in the district to support two big things. One, construction of new homes and affordable housing, and then supporting small local businesses, really that Main Street focus. And there's a big focus at the state legislative level as well at how do we create investment opportunities from a state perspective to encourage these small town main streets to redevelop, to rehab, to ensure that those small communities remain a happy, a vibrant place for people to live and settle down. And that's a challenge that our state has seen really over the past 20 to 30 years has been the migration from the rural communities to the suburban communities. And so that's always going to be a focus, especially where we are here.
The unemployment rate is at a very historical low. I mean, I did the math, and I think it would be around 8,000 are unemployed still, somewhere in there. Is there still a need, though? Do you still see people that are looking to get back to work in your area?
Yeah, and so it's this double-edged sword, right? You want to have low unemployment because that means times are good. But the challenge that we have, and I don't know what other states are kind of seeing, but Iowa has a skills gap where we have a lot of the jobs that are open. We don't have the skilled workers to do the work. A great example is on the cover of the Wall Street Journal on Easter Sunday last week, that there's an advanced manufacturing plant in North Iowa. So it's not my district, but I know that area really well because that's where I come from. And they have a ton of jobs open, but no one can do the work. And so that's something that our state legislators actually tried to implement a program called Future Ready Iowa, where they're hopefully going to do a better job of connecting the dots of 14-year-olds, 16-year-olds, 18-year-olds, pushing them into apprenticeship programs, advanced training programs, community college programs, so that we can, over time, fill in that skills gap. So while our unemployment rate is super low, there's a lot of opportunity today, and the challenge is going to become greater over the next 5 to 10 years if we don't have the right workforce in place for the businesses that are here. And so, yes, people are ready to work, but we have to invest in programs that are going to allow the people that still want to work to get the education and training that they need to do the work that we have here in the state.
I wanted to talk a little bit about the minimum wage. You have on your platform, you would like to increase the minimum wage. In Iowa, it's $7.25 right now. You want to increase to $8.75 over a 3-year period. Now, this sounds very specific, and it sounds very reasonable. I'm just wondering why that particular number and not the popular $15 minimum wage.
So this fall there's a governor's race in Iowa as well, and some of the Democratic candidates are advocating for $15 minimum wage, and they have not gotten very specific in terms of is that going to be on day one Is that going to be a 10-year rollout? Because, like you said, we're at 7.25 today. You can't go from 7.25 to 15. It's just that's you cannot do that to a small local business and expect them to be able to survive. So two things have happened in Iowa. One, we haven't raised the minimum wage, and two, there have been counties who went ahead over the past 2 or 3 years and went ahead and raised their minimum wages at the county level. Well, what the state did last year, the state legislature did last year, was they did something called preemption. That said, when it comes to matters of wage and employment, the counties do not have a say. It is a state choice. And so they basically said, what you did is invalid. You have to go back to the original minimum wage. Now, businesses can obviously do whatever they want, and they will do whatever they want when it comes to what they pay their workers. But when we're talking 7.25, the math doesn't work out. You cannot live on 7.25. And so it just makes sense. So my position in terms of just my overall platform, I want to support policies that lift people up and don't leave people behind. And 7.25 leaves people behind.
Right. Is it fair to say, to a certain extent, that excessive taxation also, though, prevents people from a fair living wage? I mean, in some cases, maybe in some cities.
Yeah, I mean, taxation is always a double-edged sword. I had a conversation yesterday, actually, with a local reporter, and I said, it's really hard for someone who's running for office to come out and say, we want to raise taxes to do X, Y, or Z, or we need to raise taxes to do this. But taxation for taxation's sake is a bad thing. But if you do taxation to support the overall vision and goals of what the state is trying to accomplish, the voters will get behind that. I think the perfect example, back in 2010, I wasn't living in Iowa at the time, but back in 2010, there was a ballot initiative that would authorize the state legislature to increase the state sales tax by 1%. And 3/8 of that 1% would go towards water quality. Because back then, 8 years ago, we saw a need to spend money and invest in our water quality and in our environment. So it passed 63% of people said yes. Well, over 7 years, the state legislature didn't do anything, even though the voters had said, we are okay with you raising the taxes to pay for this. So it's a great example of the public saying, we want to pay this tax. It's an investment we want to make. And the state legislature decided not to do it. And so to your question, yes, taxation can be a bad thing. It can stifle opportunities, but at the same time, it also creates opportunities.
But on your website, there was a lot. You do want to decrease regulations.
Yes.
Would you talk a little bit about that and what you see as obstacles with these regulations?
Sure. So the regulations, and I don't know what other states do, but in the state of Iowa, there is, if my memory serves me, there's like 140, 150 different professions, whether that be a barber or a hairstylist or a teeth whitening person, that they have to take a certain level of education, which I think we all agree is a good thing. You want to have people who know what they're doing. But there are some of those professions that the state regulations were requiring between 6 months and 18 months of classes, which cost upwards of $1,500 to thousands of dollars on top of that, just because various organizations are trying to prevent competition, and also because they want to have an income stream for themselves. And so there's a line of regulation that makes sense, and then there's a line where it doesn't, where it stifles opportunity, where it stifles innovation, where it stifles people trying to make opportunities for themselves and prices them out of the market. That's just not good business sense for our state.
What would be, like, if you had a magic wand, where would you want to see your district in the next 2 years as far as business goes?
Wow, that's a great question. I'm sure, as you know, government moves relatively slowly, and so when it comes to what can happen in 2 years, it's a hard needle to thread. But I think some of the stuff that I'm advocating for in my platform, I think would be very beneficial for the district here. One of the things I advocate for, and North Dakota does this, and Maine has tried to do this, is create a startup fund. And we have a couple of funds that kind of operate like a venture capital, but it's more focused on creating tax credits for investing in local small businesses. This would be more of, I have a great business idea. I want to hire 3 employees. Here's my business plan. And the state would then decide, let's make an investment. We believe in this. We want to support this in Dallas Center or DeSoto. And the state then has, that they have skin in the game, that the business owner has skin in the game. It's no different than a venture deal. And then the state can make a return on that. The way North Dakota does it is they've got a state-run bank. And the bank is basically the investment bank. And there's regulations that work with that. But to create a better way to support those opportunities instead of just tax credits, because tax credits are notoriously hard to track. They're hard to get an ROI on. And my entire background has been in on the business side in the private sector. And you don't do anything without understanding what's the return going to be, or what's our projected return going to be, and then making changes as you go. And so whatever we do in our district, I want to make sure that we're doing the best to support the growth, both on the education front and on the business side front.
You're pro renewable energy, and I was just wondering what that means to you. What does that look like?
So Iowa, years ago, and I wish I could take credit for it, but I was not. I don't remember if I was living here or how those decisions were made, but they made a decision 10 to 15 years ago that they were going to invest significantly on wind energy. And I remember when I met Governor Christie during the 2016 presidential campaign, he came to Iowa, went to one of those events, and he talked about how wind wouldn't work in Jersey because they just don't have a lot of it. But he said, you guys in Iowa figured out you had a lot of wind, and you harvested that for your benefit. So Iowa, by the year 2021 or 2025, I believe, over half of our energy will be produced by wind. That's a significant level of renewable energy production that, yes, we've had to make upfront investment, but it's going to pay off dividends. I mean, the clean energy, the clean environment, and it's easy for us to harvest that. And so I'm advocating for continuing to make those investments. The more that we can own our own electricity grid, the better we are going to be as a state. There's a lot of the things we can do. We can talk about ethanol. We can talk about biofuels and biodiesels. But I'm more focused on the wind side of things.
Do you see that as the renewable energy business as a growing business in Iowa?
Yeah, so we not only produce we obviously produce the energy because we've got the wind, but we also have the actual manufacturing plants here in the state that produce the turbines that the states are buying. So we've kind of got both sides of the equation where we're producing the energy, which we can sell if we need to, and we're producing the mechanism to produce the energy. So we've done a great job of supporting that industry from start to finish.
Speaking of the environment, you said 54% of Iowa's rivers, streams, lakes, and wetlands are impaired. What are the origins of these problems?
So a lot of it is we're obviously an agriculture state. That's been our bread and butter for generations, whether that be the actual field farming or livestock. And so there's a lot of reasons for it. You could talk about development, and when I mean development, I mean like land development of construction of homes and business parks and those kinds of things. Because when you do that work, it disrupts the natural environment. But then obviously agriculture. We've got big agriculture, we've got small agriculture. Both have their place in our economy. But we have to do a better job of educating the farmer on the best farming practices to protect their environment. And that's the challenge here. And sometimes this gets lost in the argument that people who are in favor of water quality efforts aren't attacking the ag industry. It's just an education situation where we have to do a better job of educating on the best farming practices. Last summer, I met with Iowa State Extension, which is a piece of Iowa State University that they focus on working at the local level with animals and farming and best practices and new innovation. And they said, every time we meet with farmers, they're excited to learn about best practices and how to do the math on how much fertilizer to put out, because farmers want the best, right? But if they don't know what's best, they're going to do what they think is best, and putting more fertilizer on the ground is not what's best. So it's important for us to have that honest conversation But there's so much education in farming, and I'm not a farmer. I never have been. My father grew up a farmer, so he's more the expert than I am. But there's things in terms of no-till farming. How do you use cover crops? How do you do bumper crops? How do you do management of the stream beds? I mean, there's so much we can do that would minimize the runoff, the nitrate runoff, that creates the problem, not only here in our state, but as the water ends up in the Mississippi and then down in the Gulf of Mexico. And so this is not just an Iowa issue. It's really an entire central United States issue.
Are you talking about man-made fertilizers?
It's both.
Okay.
It's more of the man-made that causes the water pollution that we're seeing. But we do. I'm sure you've seen in the news, if you've researched Iowa a little bit, that we have large animal operations as well. There's a big matrix. It's called the CAFO matrix that looks at where those big operations can be built and what are the requirements and those kinds of things. And there's a big fight. There's continuing to be a big fight on should we continue to allow those to be built? Is it good for the environment? Is it good for the communities? In central Iowa, we don't have a lot of those operations. They're really located in the northern half of the state for whatever reason. And so that's something that we do have to look at because those are big polluters, obviously. But the biggest cause of our water quality issues at the moment are just the field crop farming.
Is this something that whoever wins this particular race will have to address, do you think?
I think everyone has to address it because it's not just it's not set in one location. There are parts of the state that play a bigger role in causing pollution or have more direct connection to it. But in our district, like I said, there's really two main drivers of what causes some of the water quality issues. One is the actual farming, one is development. And our district is very heavy on the development side. We're the fastest growing county in the state of Iowa. That's not going to change. We're gonna have to continue to build new homes and new schools and have businesses to support these communities. So that's really where we're gonna have to do a really good job of education and regulation to make sure that when we do construction, we're following every law to protect our waterways.
I would like to move on to education. The U.S. ranks 17th in educational performance. In your education plan, you talk about implementing competency-based education models. Can you provide us with an example of what that would look like for the average student? And also, do you have confidence that this particular approach would move us up the educational rankings?
Sure. It's an absolutely great question. So what does it look like for the student? It depends on the student's abilities and their passions and how the school set it up, because the challenge with competency-based education is that it's still very, very new. There's one school district, and let me take it back. There's two school districts in our state who've really kind of gone all in on this model. One is our really big school district, and one is a more rural school district. The state, back in 2014 and 15, said this is something we want to look into. We're going to put a tiny little bucket of money aside to allow a couple of school districts to test this model. They did that. The money ran out, and so they're no longer investing or supporting that. So if a school district wants to do this, they have to find the money themselves. But back to your original question, what does it look like for the student? The students would have the ability to create their own projects, to whether that be in the school, outside the school, at home, where they are solving a problem. And the problem relates to a subject matter, math, science, social studies, that kind of thing. But the teacher's there the whole way. They're there to guide them, help them learn key material, make sure there's guideposts being met, and then there's final product. And the reason that this model works is because it teaches the student a couple things. It teaches them critical thinking, problem-solving skills. Oftentimes they will work in teams. And so they'll learn teamwork skills, collaboration skills, and the critical thinking skills. And that's what we're hearing time and time again, is that we can teach the X's and O's, so to speak, of math and science and social studies. But it's those critical elements, those really non-teachable things, those experiential things that businesses and HR departments are looking for today. And we're sitting in a seat for 8 hours a day with a chalkboard is not going to get it done. The data does show that teaching by this model produces better test scores, better reading scores, and better math scores. Will it get us to number one? That's to me irrelevant, because our goal should be to get better. And I believe competency-based and proficiency-based models get us better. And so I forget the second part of your question.
Well, it was just, would the approach, do you think this particular approach would potentially move us up? And you kind of answered that. Another thing is,
give an example too. So.
Yeah, you did. So great there. You talk about increasing funding, and I was also wondering though, on the charter school side, on the private religious schools, the online K through 12 and the language immersion schools. Do you support school choice? Would you help somebody that one of those organizations if they were seeking funding?
So that's actually a debate that's going on right now in the State House. There's the bill, I believe it's passed one chamber, but not the other quite yet. And it would essentially, if a parent wants their child to go to a parochial school, they would have the option to take a smaller amount of money from the general state fund than what would be allocated to their normal school district. So the way that our funding model works, each school district gets a certain amount of money per kid that's enrolled. I mean, right now it averages out, I want to say it's like $6,600 or something like that. So this bill that as it currently stands would, I believe, allocate between $3,000 and $4,000 that a parent could take and have it go towards a different school for their child. I'm not in favor of that. I'm not in favor of it because it's essentially saying my public school is not good enough, but I still want the money that my kid would have received. And so it hurts everyone else who's at that school. If a parent wants to send their kid to a private school and has the ability to do so, I'm 100% in favor of that option. But taking money from the private side or from the public side and spending it on the private side doesn't make sense for what we are trying to do with our public education model today.
Okay. If you get the increased funding for, the general school districts, what would you like to see with that increased funding?
Yeah, and that's, so I had a conversation with one of our local superintendents here earlier this spring, and we had a great conversation about what's happening in the district and what challenges she is seeing. And we talked about what I want to do. And I think the challenge that a lot of issues end up stuck in is we get focused on the dollar amount. And that's the way that happens here in Iowa. When it comes to education, that's the first thing that usually gets solved at the State House is how much we're going to spend on education over the next 12 months. And the conversation doesn't typically occur of what do we want the results to be? So you asked a minute ago, how do we move from 17th up in the national rankings? We don't have that conversation, right?
Right.
That's the conversation I want to have because I believe that's more important than dollars. If we say we want to go from 17 to 10 over the next 10 years, well, then let's have a conversation. What does that take? Is it a new education model? Is it longer school days, a full, a 12-month school calendar? And then what does that cost? And let's make that investment. If we all agree that that's the end goal that we want. And so I think we just get so lost in the dollars, we forget about what do we want those dollars to deliver. And I know it's going to cost money to change the way that we teach, to change the way that we test, to change the way that we innovate in the classroom. But that's an investment that I think most people and most voters will make every day of the week.
You mentioned in there the year-long school year. And you said, you don't know, but would you potentially be open to supporting that if you found it would give way better results?
So the benefit of being an independent candidate is I can look at all the data, right? I can look at any study that anybody does and really dive into it to understand what is actually the value of X, Y, or Z. And so if there were studies that came out or that are out there that say that a 12-year or a 12-month school calendar with breaks, staggered out produces better results and less education loss, over the 3-month summer, then I would absolutely look into how do you make that work. That's the benefit of being an independent is I can just go find the right solution and argue for that.
I have, the basic Iowa questions, but I also want to talk about politics at large, if you don't mind. Just throw a couple things by you. That recent spending bill of $1 trillion passed Congress. How would you have voted on that spending bill, and why?
Which spending bill are you talking about specifically?
The big one with that just came through. Rand Paul tweeted about it. A bunch of people. It's like literally like somebody hacked down a tree and put this thing on a big ass oak tree for. I mean, that was how much paper was stacked. That's what the spending bill was.
It was a big bill.
Yeah.
I think one of our senators, Joni Ernst, I think she voted against it because she hadn't had time to read it. If I remember correctly, that it's been a couple of weeks since I read about it. I don't know how I would have voted. That's one of those things where I'd have to read it and understand it. But at the end of the day, we needed a budget. I mean, we had to get it done. I'm a fiscal conservative at the end of the day, and so the things that both one of the things that Iowa does well, even if we haven't done it well the last 2 years, is we're only allowed to spend 99% of what we bring in. We can't deficit spend, unlike the federal government who can spend whatever they want. And so I would have a really hard time, just from a philosophy standpoint, if I were in Washington, to vote for any of the bills that come down the pike when it comes to funding, because we just spend whatever we want. And as a 34-year-old millennial, that doesn't work for me, because that's going to hurt me and that's going to hurt my kids. And I can't, in good conscience, support spending money that we have no way today of paying back.
Amen.
The recent school shootings, I saw on your YouTube channel, you've talked a little bit about mental health. I was just wondering, sort of your thoughts on these events and about mental health in America.
Yeah, so I was a freshman in high school when Columbine happened, and that's really the first school shooting that I really kind of remember the where and when and what that was like. And since then, I don't even. We've had a lot of shootings of that, whether it's Aurora or San Bernardino or now Parkland. I always tell people that I am not a gun owner. I don't intend to be a gun owner, but I support the Second Amendment. And so it's which you can be both. I firmly believe that you can support the Second Amendment and support sensible reforms to guns and gun purchases. Mental health is such a big challenge. And so Iowa actually, in the last 2 weeks, finally passed a mental health delivery reform bill, which has been years in the making. It reforms what happens when someone ends up in the hospital. It reforms what the police can do. It reforms, we created 6 new access centers, which, not to get too technical, but it means that someone can go to this access center, get treatment, and then there will be a better follow-up model. So when they do get discharged with medication, there'll be someone who's in charge of following up with them, making sure everything's okay, and getting that follow-up, that connection, which was not happening. It'll also make sure that if someone is experiencing some kind of mental health episode, that if law enforcement does get involved, they will understand and be trained on what is actually happening. Instead of putting them in jail, they'll get to an actual treatment center, which just makes all the sense in the world, because having someone who's in a mental health state in jail is not the right place for that person to be, for a lot of reasons. We have to fix the funding model for that, but we're getting there. In Iowa, we also have a problem with rural mental health. Farmers specifically have one of the highest rates of suicide in the country, because they basically run their business at a break-even pace. When you plant your crop in the spring, you're basically praying to the gods of the weather that it works out for you. And if it doesn't, then you're in the red. There's nothing you can do. And so we have to do a better job in the rural communities providing mental health care. Part of that is telehealth options, which we also passed this year in Iowa, where insurance companies are going to be required to insure and provide telehealth options, which is, again, another step in the right direction. We are having this conversation all across the country about mental health, and it's one that's been needing to happen for a long time.
Is there a problem you think with Medicare and Medicaid funding specific mental health?
I don't know that there's a problem with funding. I think it's just I think at least here in Iowa specifically, it's been a delivery problem. There just haven't been the right places for people to go. It's a pretty fragmented system. A great example is we had a personal family friend who had a child who did have some mental, and they were told when they went to get help it would take months to get help. That's 100% unacceptable. And so we have to have. That leads me to another challenge here in Iowa: is we do not have enough professionals to provide the services. And so how do you bring those people to your state? And that's a different conversation about bringing nurses and mental health care professionals to the state. But if people can't get the care, you will have a problem. And so we have to solve that end of the equation as well.
Good. Looking at your website, I thought it was very unique because I think it's definitely, you're definitely an independent. Let's put it that way. I think to call you a centrist, I wouldn't even go there. I would just say you're an independent in general. Some independents you can say, well, that's just a liberal, or that's just a conservative without a party. But I think you're definitely an independent. And I know you originally ran in 2003 as a mayor in a big, like a 10-person race. Were you always an independent?
So that race was a nonpartisan race, and so you didn't declare a party. I grew up a Republican because I was a fiscal conservative, and that has not changed in my lifetime. It's how I run my personal life, and it's how I think the government should run. But I really became an independent over the last three years, I would say, as I saw the dysfunction not only at our state level, but at the federal level. You've got people who've been elected to serve who are unwilling to talk to members of the other party, who are unwilling to accept ideas outside of their party platform. And so when you've got two groups of people who are unwilling to talk to each other, you're going to get one side who wins for this 2 years, and the other side is going to win the next 2 years. And you're never going to come together on policy that actually moves us forward for the long term, instead of 2 years this, 2 years that, 2 years this. And that's not a way to run a government, because you wouldn't run a business like that. And so that's really why I became an independent, was because I firmly believe in finding the best ideas, which come from all sides of the aisle, not just Republican, not just Democrat, not just Libertarian. Everyone has good ideas. If we bring them together, I think we'll get a lot more done and do a lot more good.
Do you think that choosing a side is actually kind of a disservice to the American people by, choosing one side and just shunning, like if I want to be a Democrat, I support everything that is represented as a Democrat, and you shun anything the Republican side has to offer? Doesn't that do somewhat of like a disservice? And I would say vice versa the same way. Like, there's got to be that give and take, doesn't there?
Absolutely needs to be the give and take. And I was thinking before we jumped on this interview that when I first got into politics, it was 1998, 99. So it was the presidential election of Al Gore and George W. Bush. And the first person I supported in that race was John McCain. And I still support him to this day because I firmly believe he's a guy who will do what is right. Sometimes it's harder than others to do that. But I think you saw that earlier. I forget if it must have been last year when he voted no on the healthcare reform bill.
Right.
Because he saw that it was the wrong thing to do. He bugged his party to do that. He did that back after in 2001 or 2002 with McCain-Feingold. That was a Republican-Democrat bill that they came together to find a solution for. We don't have very many people who are willing to do that anymore. And it only hurts us. But yet we keep doing it. We keep supporting candidates who clearly don't want to work with the other side. For whatever reason, they don't want to work with the other side. And it creates bad policy. It creates bad results. And it puts us in a situation where we're always going from one crisis to the next, because we're not willing to reach our hand out and say, how can we do this together?
Right.
Right. Republican Ralph Watts has been the district representative since 2003, I believe. Is he running again? And does that district tend to lean blue or red?
So he is not running again. He announced a month or so ago that he was going to be retiring. So it's going to be a three-person race. Myself as the independent. There's a Democrat who's running, and a Republican who will also be running. The Republican is going to be someone who is moving from outside the district inside the district. He's the current House Majority Leader, and so it's going to be a very interesting race. Our district is also interesting, as are a lot of districts across the state and really the country in terms of total voter registration numbers. We are slightly higher on the no party voters than Republican voters. It's like 39.3%, 39.1%, and the remainders are registered as Democrats. And so this race is, in my opinion, from 30,000 feet, very wide open in terms of we're going to be different candidates and we're going to argue for different things. And it's really going to come down to the voters deciding, do I want what we've done, what we've been doing, or do I want to support someone who is going to bring a new approach, new ideas, and be willing to actually listen to me, the voter, who he will be called to serve and represent in the State House? I'm excited to have that conversation.
Do you think you'll be included in any debates if they come up?
We'll have to wait and find out. I mean, this district has never had three candidates. There was a debate during the last cycle, but it was Republican and a Democrat. I will call for one as often as I can. I think it's important for the voters to hear all sides. And if they do not invite me, then I'll stand in the audience and ask as many questions as I can and let people know that when they go into the ballot box, there will be three names for them to choose from.
Any events you have coming up with your campaign? What's the future strategy of your campaign?
We're going to be at a couple town festivals and town parades this summer, and then we will have events as we get closer to the fall. We're going to have a celebration event when we print in our ballot. The way that the state of Iowa works, the three major parties, Republican, Democrat, and Libertarian parties, do have primaries, so they've already filed their paperwork. Independents don't file their paperwork until July. And so when we file that paperwork, we're going to have kind of a big kickoff event and meet and greets and that kind of thing. So those will all be on the website once it turns to not being winter outside and we can get out knocking on doors and that kind of thing.
And that's richarddedor.com, correct? Any other information that you want to plug or something other addresses we can find you at online?
If you go to that, you obviously can find my Facebook and Twitters and Instagrams where I always post about events and things we're doing in the community. I just think it's important for the voters, wherever you are, to be involved and be asked questions and be open to. You don't have to have a candidate that is 100% in your lane. I want people to support candidates that are willing and open to being challenged and to buck the status quo. When we buck the status quo, when we actually listen, when we actually engage with the voters and each other, we're going to find that we have more common ground than we don't. And when you find that common ground, that's when we can find the best policy moving forward. And I think the more we can do that at the local level and the state level, it's going to filter all the way up. It really will. And so I'm just excited for this fall. There's more independents than me running across the country, which is an exciting momentum. And I think it's going to do really good for our communities.
Well, I certainly hope the people of Iowa hear you out and hear what you have to say, because I do think you have a great message, and you have also a background of community service as well, which I think is a wonderful thing. And your policies are very unique, and it's very interesting stuff. So I thank you so much for being here with us this morning.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me. It's been a great pleasure.
Yeah, yes. Have a great day.